Okay, we have a couple of our guests in here. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for one of our Summer of Opportunity programs. Glad that you're all able to make it. We have our very fabulous guest here, Mr. Avi Strauss, who some of you may know and be familiar with. Otherwise, you're going to get to meet him today in this kind of setting that allows for us to have a dialogue. And sometimes the depth that you can get with a one-on-one conversation is extremely valuable, as well as the kind of one-on-one nature that gets emulated by the Q&A that takes place thereafter. The likelihood is that you'll get that question answered by someone who you just learned a lot about from their perspective. So we're very happy to introduce Ari Strauss here tonight, who's joined us to answer some questions. And just a couple of, I guess, things to make note of. Again, just make sure that you are muted and that your video is stopped as well for the duration of the event. If you do have questions at any point in time, if you'd like to send those in, you most certainly can. I'd like for you to direct those to Ms. Barbara Lerman, who is joining us for the event as well. So if you go in the chat, direct your message right to Barbara Lerman in a private message. At any point in time, she'll collect those. And if we get a large amount, to make sure that we're being respectful of time, we may take a small break in the middle to answer some questions so that we leave some for the end to also answer. All right, but without further ado, I want to give Mr. Strauss the floor so that he could give us a brief introduction and then get into our evening of dialogue. So, Ari, you can go right ahead.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to speak a little bit about my background, my experience, and share anything that might be relevant, applicable, or useful for any student just a couple years behind me, but essentially in the same position that I've probably been in several times, other than the obvious pandemic circumstances. A little bit of a background about me. I graduated YU in 2018. I double majored in biology and political science. And I had been on the pre-med track, but I always had an idea that I wanted to go into some aspect of healthcare that wasn't medicine. And a lot of people had given me advice that the longest, shortest way to do that is to get a medical degree. But at a certain point, I realized that wasn't really the path for me. So even though I finished all the pre-med requirements, I didn't actually follow through on applying to medical school. Instead, in my senior year, I started pursuing alternative career opportunities in healthcare consulting. So I spent my senior year, I felt like I was a little bit late to the game, and I had spent 4 years on campus, and I started reaching out to the Career Center, to my father for advice, other people in my network to figure out what kind of career I wanted, or really how to understand, how to think about the business of healthcare, which is my interest. Ended up getting a few interviews. Now I work at a healthcare consulting firm based in New York City called the Marwood Group. I've been there for 2 years. I'm an analyst there. And one other thing that I've been doing over the past 2 years is I've been a part-time student in the Katz School of Health, which is YU's program for, or school for several master's programs, studying biotechnology management and entrepreneurship, which is just a fancy way of saying, pharmaceutical and life science consulting, which is adjacent to my job, my career, and part of my long-term career goals. I'd throw in one or two other random facts about myself. I was a licensed EMT. That license expired after I was an EMT for 5 years. I did that while I was in YU, and I guess we'll leave it at that, and I'll incorporate some of the other aspects of my background as the questions come in.
Certainly. Thank you for that excellent intro. So, big thing that we like to talk about with our students who come through the Career Center is their skills. And we kind of address them as direct and transferable skills. So in your experience, where did you learn the importance of developing transferable and direct skills? And can you recall at one point during your experience at YU, undergrad or even graduate, that development of skills became how you viewed internship opportunities as well?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a great leading question. I learned the importance of developing skills and transferable skills from my father. He gives individuals career guidance all the time in my home. He brings them to his office, and he kind of taught me to think of really everything you do and every opportunity you have and every internship or extracurricular opportunity as a place to develop skills. And there's kind of the obvious skills, Excel, PowerPoint, which individuals develop, and you don't realize how much more you can develop in those areas until you start becoming competent in those areas and asked to do more with those kinds of skills. But then there's obviously the softer skills of something like professional communication, which I think became clearer to me as I got older and as I had to send more emails, asking someone for a connection or asking for some other kind of relationship or making a request where you kind of take the time, spending longer than you would expect to write an email, and that's a skill that you develop as well. The second thought I had about this question, Matt, is that we live in a skill-based world now. I think that's obvious to many different people. People obviously, when they're hiring, bringing people on for internships, they want to be around people that they like. That's always number one. But the second, right behind that, is they want the people that they like to have skills that are useful. That doesn't just mean someone who's smart or someone who is interesting or can be interested in different stuff, but someone who can perform, someone who can, take a bunch of information and present it in a meaningful or useful way for a client, or someone who they feel they can trust with various degrees of responsibility in their job or in their internship. And the third thing, which is kind of the end of your question, I think, is at what point during my experience in YU that I realized this, or that it became a part of how I viewed things. And I'd say it was there from the very beginning. I pursued a lot of extracurricular activities in my time at YU, and I did them primarily because I wanted to, and because I liked them. Mm-hmm. But because I wanted to be involved in the newspaper, because I wanted to do Model UN, because I wanted to be involved in B'nai Akiva. That was something that I did. But I always also viewed them through some lens of skill development. With the newspaper, I was a writer and an editor. I always thought, well, this is obviously developing my writing skills and then my editing skills, but it was also a great place for me to develop that kind of professional communication with deans or with the administration when I would speak to them. It was a place where I was able to develop kind of a managerial skill, both in how to take feedback from superiors and how to give feedback to subordinates. It also gave me a sense of project management, and I think really any extracurricular or internship opportunity can be viewed through that lens, even if you're doing it because you like to do it. There's always some skill to be gleaned from really any experience you have in life. Or you can look at it in reverse and say, I really did not like anything about that experience, but it could become a kind of an anti-skill where you understand that maybe this is something I'm not good at, or maybe this is something I'm not interested in doing, but I still learned from it and I understood what could be asked of a person in a certain position. So the way to just summarize it all up is skills are always important. They're everywhere. They're all around you, and they present themselves to the people who are looking for them and realize that they're there in the obvious and less obvious places.
So excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're off to a great start with this conversation about skills and really maximizing opportunities. And I really value that you've been sharing this kind of perspective right at the beginning. And kind of shifting gears, keeping on skills a little bit, but talking about a different skill that is networking. So considering networking and our students encountering a different kind of summer of engagement with their opportunities, whether they be research or traditional internships in the way of working for small or large companies and what have you, how might your experience be similar to, as well as different from, students who are currently encountering these experiences over the summer in the realm of networking?
Yeah, well, for starters, I obviously was not in school during a pandemic. I work now during a pandemic, but I wasn't in school then. So in those ways, it's obviously different. The fact that we're having this talk over Zoom is different. But I think in a lot of ways, viewing a professional network and networking is very similar. Even during a time like this where you spend most of the time in your home and online and virtually. In terms of your network itself and then expanding that network, I like to think of it in a lot of ways as three tiers. You have a superficial network of people who are a collection of your acquaintances. It might be a little harder to expand that when you're stuck in your home, but they still exist. They're still out there. They're people you've come into contact with or people that you know. So that might be a little harder to develop at this time, but it's still something that's there and something you can tap into. The next tier or a different tier would be kind of the people who are going to help you no matter what. your family, your best friends, your neighbors, people who know you, they want to go out of their way for you. And, that's developed before, 3, 4, 5 months ago. That's been something that's a part of your life. It's something that it's just a part of who you are, and that network will exist, and existed for me and exists for you no matter what. And then there's the third one, which I think in this situation is where you can still kind of grow, and where maybe it really makes the difference, when you're trying to think of yourself as how do I get that tiny edge, to get the career that the position I want, or into the career that I want. And that would be the people you encounter professionally through something like an internship, and with whom you develop a relationship. And that relationship can be developed whether or not you're in person. If you're doing work for them, if you're showing them that you're someone who's responsible, that will build your network and bring them closer to the tier of people who want to go out of their way for you, and moving them from just an acquaintance into someone who's really going to be someone you can tap into as someone significant in your network, not just the day after you end your internship with them, but someone you can reach out to 6 months later, a year later, someone you can reach out to for a friend who, if they needed help. That's all part of networking. It's not just to scratch someone else's back, but just to think, you got to network to get work. And as long as you view whatever experience you're having right now, or whatever research opportunity you have right now, or even if you're looking for one of those opportunities, that you're just going to be proving yourself by proving yourself to the people you have professional relationships with, that will expand your network regardless of if there's a pandemic going on. And I think that's similar to the experience I had, back when I was in YU, and it's true for me today, and I think it would be true for the students today, as well.
I love that phrase that you said, you got to network to get work. I think that's one of the best things that I've heard in reference to getting out there and communicating with professionals and building those resources. We're going to circle back to questions that relate to references and networks a little bit later. So I'm glad that was brought up.
I mean, I think, I didn't come up with that phrase. I've just heard it, many, many times. I don't want to take credit. I can come up with my own turns of phrase, but definitely not that one.
Well, you've done us all a favor by certainly incorporating it here, because it sticks and it has its impact. So I'm glad that you have taken that and worked it into how you share your perspective. So I appreciate that very much. So students may have different circumstances, some of which have pushed and challenged students to seek opportunities for the sake of having one over the summer. And sometimes if they fit into career goals in that strategy, and then sometimes they may not. So in your opinion, what can you share about practical ways to make the most of summer experiences, whether or not they align with your career goals?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question, because I think it's really my entire background, and I know the people viewing right now don't necessarily know every detail of my background, but as I alluded to in my introduction, I didn't really have a straight path from freshman year through the job I ended up at, and I didn't even know that the career that I thoroughly enjoyed today was even something that existed, or didn't understand exactly what it was. And really, like I said, I was pursuing internships and extracurriculars because I enjoyed them, but none of them were really a straight vertical line to the career that I have. So I think the question of aligning goals, aligning internships with your career path, is firstly a question about just performing. Wherever it is that you perform well, you're going to gain the skills that we discussed a little bit earlier, and you're also going to just gain a perspective that helps you understand what it is your real interests are, what opportunities exist, because there's always more than you think there is. And I said healthcare consulting. To some people that means consulting people who invest and try and buy healthcare companies. That's what I do. To other people, it means helping pharmaceutical companies figure out what drugs to develop. And to other people, it means 3, 4, or 5 different things. And within every larger industry, there's many different segmented individual opportunities. And the way you build yourself up to pursue or even find out about those opportunities is just making the most of each experience that you have, and learning the most within each experience that you have, to position yourself. If you're not the person who wants to go straight into an investment bank, and you haven't been, that type A from the very beginning, and knew, my first summer in college, I'm going to have this job, and the second summer I'm going to have that job. Almost everyone else if you're not that person, then you're going to fall into this much, much, much larger bucket of people who are constantly, tweaking and adjusting their career path based on the experiences they have, they like, the experiences they have that they don't like. And then, just remember that your experiences, if you're developing skills, they're transferable. So you can be a person like me who worked in an ambulance corps, never expect to become a paramedic, go through a higher level of training or an emergency room doctor, and still take the skills that you develop as an ambulance driver and as a basic level EMT and say, well, what did I learn? I learned how to interact with people who are very different than me, who are strangers to me that I'm coming to help. I learned how to handle very stressful situations. I learned how to take command and control of a situation. I learned how to maintain my workspace and keep track of supplies. And those things are transferable in any situation. I mean, obviously also the CPR, who doesn't want to have someone around the office who's, capable of performing CPR and has done it in the past. So I think, thinking of every opportunity you have as a chance to develop transferable skills will, in a way, allow you to align whatever experiences you have into the eventual career that you tap into or that you might want to tap into. And the last thing I'll say, and this is kind of a small regret that I have, is as part of fulfilling the pre-med track, I had to go through this kind of check off a box, which I really did not enjoy and did not put my all into, of doing some degree of clinical research or any kind of lab research. And I didn't want to work in the lab, so I got permission from the pre-health advisor to do clinical research, where I was helping collect data for an observational study of patients. How could a hospital encourage emergency room patients to seek further treatment for ailments that they have? And really all I did was data entry, and I was capable of much more, and there were other opportunities to do much more with the research, but I didn't want to, because for whatever reason I said, whatever, this isn't for me. And then I found myself in an interview at a relatively large consulting firm that I would have loved to work at, that had that theoretically had a spot for me to be an analyst in the city. And I'm going through my interviews, and I think every single one went well. I had 4 interviews in the final round, but the one interview that went badly was with the managing director. And it was going pretty well. And then he just looks down my resume, and I thought, I can speak to every experience that I have. And the one thing that was like a little, left on there about this clinical research experience I had, that was the thing he was most interested in. And he starts quizzing me on what did you research? What did you learn from the study? What were the outcomes? And I had 0 answers. I had not given my effort at all to that specific opportunity. And I feel like that is the reason they didn't offer me a job in New York City. And just messing up that 1 out of 4 interviews because of one specific experience where I didn't really try and give it my all, may have been the difference maker for me in securing an opportunity, even though it wasn't directly aligned with what the company did that I was trying to work at. But it was just, it was a loose end that I could have made a tight end, and I hadn't, and I think it hurt me. Thankfully, everything worked out, but that's just a unique experience of mine that I think kind of helps understand what it is when we're talking about aligning your career, your previous experiences with a future career goal. They don't have to go in a straight line. They just need to be that you made the most of each experience in order for them to be worthwhile.
Definitely an excellent story to consider, especially learning from that experience of saying, shoot, that's something I could have thought about a little bit more in the middle of this experience that I had. And in retrospect, hindsight's 2020, as they say. So I'm happy that you have learned from it and shared it with this group today. Some would consider that to be a very practical thing, to think about your work while you're doing it. What are some practical strategies that you've used that have helped you to maximize internships? And considering our circumstances with virtual internships, how might those apply to this setting that our students are encountering today?
Well, there's one that I'll say has gotten me everywhere. And it's something I had to learn. In high school, I thought I was a smart kid, and my parents would kind of have to talk me down a little bit when I always thought I knew better than the adults in the room or than someone who was trying to give me help. And at a certain point, I learned that everyone wants to hear that you are the type of person who wants to learn. So how do you maximize an opportunity? What's a practical strategy is you have to, for yourself, always think that what you're doing is an opportunity for you to learn. And it's a little bit selfish because someone's asking you to do work. They're not asking you to become a better person while doing it. Obviously, that's a great benefit. But while you're doing work, you always have that opportunity to learn, even if you're doing something like data entry, because if you're trying to be aware of the situation, then you start to pick up a lot of information. Well, how many data points are there in the world of data for the specific thing that I'm studying? Or why is it that I'm being asked to collect this in the first place? What use is it? And how is my supervisor going to use it to augment or improve their business or their research? And then people love the humility that comes with saying, well, I'm here to learn. I learned a lot, but I want to learn more. And it really shows a degree of passion. And I'll also say it's helped me from a practical standpoint in just always thinking of every day that I go to work, what new thing am I learning today? But it's also helped me in interacting with my supervisors when my managing director has a performance review with me. So once every 6 months, I've had a few at this point. Every single time I go into the meeting thinking that I'm going to make very clear to him that I feel like I've learned a lot in the past 6 months, but I also have a lot left to learn. And every single time he smiles, he looks back at me and he says, Avi, I used to, he's the managing director in my consulting firm. He used to work in the Senate on the health committee. And he says, if I knew now what I knew when I was giving advice to senators, I would have like slapped myself because I didn't know anything then. And even today, when I've been doing healthcare consulting for 15, 20 years, I'm still learning new things every day. And, people love to hear that. They love to see that. And it really just shows a degree of humility in yourself and also will greatly improve your ability to expand, your horizons in other ways. And yeah, I mean, that's really the most practical strategy I could think of, other than some of the things that we've mentioned, just giving it your all, which I think is a cliche, but is quite obvious. But I guess it'll also allow you, the more you learn, the more you understand what it is your supervisor needs or might need, and how the process can be improved, or how the additional what additional work could be done to improve for the business or for the professor that you're working for, or whoever it is. I think that is as well. So if you view everything not only as an experience that you can put on your resume, as an experience where you're gaining professional experience, but also as a literal learning opportunity to understand what is going on in skilled nursing facilities in New Jersey, as an example, nursing homes, and how is me learning about that going to help me become a better professional, both in this specific project I'm working on, but also the next time I encounter anything else in healthcare. That would be an example for me, but just always seeing it through that lens of, this is the learning opportunity. I'm going to prove myself through this learning opportunity. People are going to be impressed with it as a learning opportunity and probably that I think of it that way and want to give me more to do. I think that's just a very useful practical strategy. Oh, and there is one other thing, just, I don't want to speak too much, drone on one question, but prompt email responses, especially during this pandemic, I think people really appreciate. Some people are definitely, dragging their feet when they're sending back emails. And if you're the kind of person who, even if you were, sitting on your phone and texting because no one's around, but you're the person who every time someone asks you to do something, you get on your email, you respond right away, you say, I'm working on it, or I was about to start that, or you get them the answer that they need. People really appreciate promptness, and it's something that can really distinguish you from other people, or just in the eyes of the person who you're working for. If you're the kind of person who doesn't only do the right work, but does the right work in a reasonable amount of time allotted, and lets them know, how you're doing it along the way. I think that's another very practical skill to maximize any opportunity that you have.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing those very, very useful skills to incorporate into these students' experiences this summer. I think one of the things that you spoke about really leads us into this next line of questions of, that relationship that you had with your managing director, and probably with every supervisor you've had in the past, that you've used this lens of learning and opportunities to learn as a cornerstone to your performance. When you have working relationships with your supervisors and with management, or however you address it, how do you find that interns should ask for opportunities for development? And do you believe that there's also a room for them to perform in order to earn those opportunities to do more in their work?
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit torn because on the one hand, you can think of it as how do I show someone, especially when I'm not with them in person, how do I show them that I'm eager and that I'm hungry for more opportunities versus, how do I just perform as best as I can to secure those opportunities? So I'd say it's a little bit of both. It matters on a person's situation for sure. And they need to feel out, what level of, reaching out to their supervisor is warranted and what level is a bit creepy. But if I had to choose between the two, I would lean towards earning it through your work. In that way, you don't become overeager, and what could be worse would be you don't want to overpromise. I made this mistake a couple times at the beginning of my career at Marwood, where I would kind of overpromise on the degree of information that I think is available on the internet that we might be able to find. And then it's way worse when you have to backtrack. So in this case, it would be being overeager and overpromising on the amount of work you can do. You don't want to be the person who asks to do more things, but then becomes quickly overwhelmed or for whatever reason is incapable of, performing on what you asked to do. I think that's something to try and avoid. Whereas if you take the position of trying to earn more work, you get first of all, the quality of your work is much better. And I think often people would rather see quality than quantity. That's also something I learned very quickly. I was sending things to managers things that they should not have been looking at, and things that I thought, oh, they'll just edit this a little bit and format it better for me because that's something they're probably better at. They've been doing this for longer, and people don't want that. People want, especially managers, supervisors, they want to see finished products and they want to see quality products. So someone who finishes things promptly, responsibly, and in a quality fashion is the person who's going to earn more opportunities. And because managers want work done and they want more work done that maybe they haven't even realized they want done, they're going to tap into the people who have shown they produce quality work in a prompt manner, and they're just going to give it to them, or even ask you, what opportunities have you had in mind for the business, for the research that you think can help us. And if you're someone who's been really diligent with the work they've been doing, then those ideas will come naturally.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so, keeping on the line of questions with supervisors and working relationships with them, oftentimes you may encounter as an intern some challenges that could require managing directors, supervisors, et cetera, to step in and solve problems that either you haven't been trained yet or you don't have the expertise for. Now, it doesn't always take away from being solution oriented and being productive. So how do you find that the responsibility of being solution oriented is developed in an intern and in a student, and how much do you think that they can reasonably assume in solving problems for their work?
Yeah. So, well, for starters, I work at a boutique consulting firm, so we don't have, a formal. Actually, no. I'm sorry. I wanted to say this at the end of the question. I had reviewed this before. I'll say this for sure. So, in terms of thinking of solutions, solutions find people who take the time to reflect on the meaning behind their work. And obviously, this is a theme for me. You don't want to be the mindless drone who gets through the work. You want to be someone who understood all the work that you did and what the purpose of it was. And people who think like that are the people who find solutions for how the process can be improved, how additional research or work can be done. And those become solutions, right? If you're looking through all the information and you're noticing things that are incorrect, or you're noticing that something might not be consistent, you're only going to notice that if you're reflecting on what it is you're actually doing, as opposed to saying, well, I'll finish this up, I'll see if there's a problem, and if there's a problem, I'll ask my manager how to solve it. If you're reflecting on the work that you're doing, you might come up with that solution before. You might be able to propose it to the person who's checking your work and say, I ran into this problem while I was going through the work. what do you think of this solution? I already looked into it or thought about it a little bit. I think that's one important, that's how you become someone who's a solution finder, and someone who's solution oriented. And I think managers and supervisors trust that when they see someone has reflected on the work that they do, they'll ask them those questions. They'll say, how do you think we can solve this problem, as opposed to saying, well, I'm going to solve the problem. There's obviously many examples when it comes to consulting, because we're always reviewing third-party information or information that's on the internet collected and viewed through a lens of our expertise. But very often we bump up against walls where the information we're looking for doesn't exist. The information a client's asking for doesn't exist. So we always have to be solution-oriented and thinking, how do we work around an impossible problem that the data just is not available? So there's one good example I thought of where my firm produced a paper on gene therapy, and the entire premise was that certain very expensive new drugs for treating cancer or other rare diseases can cost $1 million, million and $1.5 million, even more than that. And how do drug companies justify those costs to insurers? So we were tasked with finding a way to justify those costs to insurers. Why should an insurer pay $1 million for an injection to someone's eye so they don't go blind? Well, we had to think of it in terms of, well, no one's going to answer this question, what the value proposition of a therapy is. We have to try and find a model for showing it. So what we came up with was, you have to look at the treatment costs associated with not getting the new therapy, which is obvious. But then when we were thinking more in a solution-oriented way, well, that's the obvious thing. No one's going to ask us for just that. We put our heads together and we said, okay, well, what's the lost productivity of this person who's blind? What's the impact in their contributions to the world, to society as a worker if they're blind? What is the cost? How do you quantify that? What's the cost to someone who's bedridden because they have a rare disease for their caregivers and their lost work opportunity? And how do you quantify and calculate that? And all these thoughts and questions became a workable model that we were able to provide to the client, that showed we were solution oriented. And I was a part of the team that put that together and was able to think, well, how do we find the information as a workaround to the general problem, which is why we were hired in the first place. And it all comes back to just reflecting, asking questions about what it is that you're doing. And you ask those questions, you think about what you're doing, you come up with the solutions. Again, solutions find the people who are being aware, who show a degree of awareness about what they're doing. I think that's just the way I think of it. And I think that can help. And just one example of something that I'm doing now myself is what I was going to say in the beginning is I work at a boutique consulting firm. It's very small. There's no formal training program. And I thought there was a couple of lapses in, the process, just because they were very busy and people not necessarily showing me the ropes at the right time. And then I was getting asked to do things that I didn't understand yet. So for right now, because I reflected on that experience, is when I have a bit of free time, I'm preparing a 5-6 page little manual in slide form for future analysts in my position, who might have the exact same background as me, limited in understanding of what a consulting firm does and what our consulting firm does, just as a 101 on how to understand work at my firm. And I think of that as a solution to the problem of people coming in and not knowing and not being able to get taught or trained in what it is their job is as a healthcare consultant at Marwood. That's something I came up with on my own. No one asked me to come up with it. I'm going to work on it. I'm going to send it to one of my colleagues and then show it to my director when I think it's of a certain degree of quality.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you sharing these experiences and talking about how it is that you can create this work as well as earn the opportunities. I think that there's a balance there to it. And I think one very important thing to consider is that all of this work that you've done, that you've shared with us tonight, and all these lessons that you've learned and you incorporate in your professional experience have a certain degree of reward and payoff for you, not just in how you've done work for your career or that is a reward to you, but you've done great work for those who you serve and who you work for. And when it comes to those who you work for, some of those individuals may have served as really strong, positive professional references. So what would you say is the role that a professional reference plays in making the most of an internship or opportunity over the summer for these students?
It's kind of what we spoke about at the beginning, which is your network. And if
Mhm.
you're using a research opportunity or an internship opportunity as also, not just what am I going to put on my resume, how am I going to explain this gap in time, this summer, this 6 months, whatever it is, you should also be thinking of it as a chance to build your network. And you don't get that many opportunities in life to interact professionally with people who are supervising your work. And those people are going to be the most reliable in explaining to someone else what you're capable of. And that doesn't mean that someone who you work for is going to recommend you to work at another place, the second you're trying to leave. But you shouldn't think of them as a person who is just someone you can tap into for 3 months and then they forget about you. You should think of them as someone you want to keep in touch with. If you see an article that's interesting that you send back to them, maybe you reflect and say thank you for the opportunity that you gave me. But several months later, when you see how the experience has now affected you, I've done that a couple times with individuals who gave me guidance and advice in how to pursue my career, but who didn't actually provide me any references or any job opportunities. And I've reached out to them even a year later and said, these were the things you told me. These are the things that I've adopted and incorporated into my outlook and how I pursue opportunities. And I've even shared your advice with other people. And there was one specific person I shared that with. I thanked him in an email. It was a couple sentences, and he said, "Thank you so much for saying this. Almost everyone who speaks to me, they take my advice and they run away. They disappear, and they don't. You don't turn that person into a constant connection, a constant person in your network. It's just someone who, was there and then they fell off. So every opportunity you have should be seen through the lens of, wow, I've actually developed a relationship with someone. How can I keep in touch with them every once in a while? How can I leverage them not only for what job opportunity they can give you, but who they might know and how they can just maybe even invite me to a conference that they're going to, or let me know about something that they're working on or something they're thinking about, or someone that they know and they'll say, this is someone who worked really well for me. Maybe I should shoot that student an email and see if they're still looking for a job, because I couldn't offer them a job, but you can offer them a job, some third party that they know. And I think that's more often than not the way that people actually end up in jobs, is not through someone who said, oh, I know this person, let me hire them. It's through, well, I can vouch for someone. That person would be you, the student in this case. I can vouch for someone. Let me reach out to my friend who knows a friend who can help this person. And I think that's way more often how people expand their career horizons, and should be how students view any opportunity that they have. It's not just, I'm here selfishly to boost my resume. It's, I'm here to perform, and I'm here also to grow the network of people who are going to connect me to their networks of people who are going to help me, and then to whom I can help in the future and reciprocate either to them or other people.
Awesome. So one final question for you. Your perspective has been extremely valuable for even myself to process everything that you've been sharing. So I thank you for the extent to which you've talked with us today. This last one is one that we talked about earlier about, kind of reframing and figuring out how to get the perspective here. And I think that what I would love to know is, if you were in the shoes of a student who this year is in undergrad and is encountering a virtual experience, whether or not it's related to your career goals, what's one major thing that you would do to maximize a virtual work environment, considering that you may encounter it more often in the future with the changing landscape of the world, considering the pandemic and other circumstances?
Well, definitely something I mentioned before, which is just being prompt. You got to be prompt. Everyone's off doing their thing. They're doing work at any hour of the day that they feel comfortable with. And that works in some situations. It doesn't work in others, but it's very clear when some people, and I have supervisors that are like this, and some colleagues who they're just not being prompt in how they respond to things. And being prompt isn't just, checking off the box, oh, I responded to this person. It shows a degree of caring. It shows that you're either passionate about what you're doing, or at the very least that you're responsible with what you're doing. So I'd say number one is just be prompt with everything you do, and it reflects upon you more than just someone who's answering an email. It reflects upon you very well, I'd say, is one. Number two is, I would definitely jump back to think of everything as a learning opportunity. On the one hand, you've lost the in-person experience, but see the benefit of, being around, no one's looking over your shoulder, as maybe I can just, peruse the internet, but not for my hobbies, and not to look through Instagram or Facebook. I can peruse the internet and explore some of the things that are adjacent to the work that I'm doing. And things that are adjacent are often very relevant. And the more you build your knowledge base as a larger foundation, the bigger pyramid you could build on top of it. So you're just starting out. This is the advice that the individual I referred to, that I reached out back out to. This is a great piece of advice he gave me, is when you're starting out your career, you got to think of it as the top of a funnel. It's very open, it's very large. And as you make your career moves down the line, you kind of hone in on, how am I going to shrink this funnel to become more of an expert in a very particular area that you're become very knowledgeable and very experienced in. So one of the best ways to build out how big that funnel is, and to expand how as many opportunities as you might be able to get, is to think, what am I going to learn now? What kind of knowledge bases can I accumulate? And you have that opportunity in a tremendous way by being online, to do so. And the third thing I would say is, and this is just true virtual or not, and true, I can't project what the future work environment is going to look like, virtual or not, is, again, just do quality work. No one wants quantities of work. Some individuals want quantities of work, but for whatever reason, they're the minority for sure. Doing quality work, and not just sending something the second it's done, but reading it over, checking for typos, making sure it's formatted in a way that's pleasing to the eye and easy to read and easy to understand, not just for you because you did it and you know everything about the piece of paper that you put together, but for someone who's looking at it for the first time. As an example, just doing quality work it's valuable in the workspace, and maybe even more valuable now virtually, when everything's so up in the air and in flux, and people don't want to have to go through an iterative process back and forth on email, where they can't come to your desk and show you. You want to give them the best work that you can as the starting point, and don't make them, go through the hassle of, well, I can't walk over to the person's desk. I don't want to call them right now, or whatever. Those would be the three things I would think of. Be prompt. Always think of how you're learning from the experience, and expanding that foundation of knowledge that you have, and how can I just produce the best quality work that I possibly can for the individuals who are asking for it.
Terrific. Well, what an excellent way to wrap up the questions that we have. And now I want to open it up to the rest of the group. And as mentioned before, please direct your questions to Ms. Barbara Lerman, and she'll field them and send them over as they come in, so that we could talk about what you may want to follow up with Mr. Avi Strauss shared today. The great jumping off points that we talked about, just reminding the group, we spoke a lot about practical strategy. We spoke a lot about networking and how it may be similar or different to your own circumstances today in summer 2020. And we talked about relationships with not only your network, but with the person who can become a very valuable resource in your network, which is your supervisor or manager. So if you do have questions, we'll be here for a few more moments so that you may ask Barbara, and Barbara can field those questions, and we can take care of those. So we'll give them a moment or two.
And I see my father's in the chat too. If he asks a question, I won't know it's from him, because I imagine Barbara's not going to mention who it comes from. So you can feel free to push me and see if I say what you would say, or say something slightly different.
Indeed, there is a degree of anonymity. Hello, Joel. How are you? Hope you are doing very well.
Yeah, he's going to call me the second the Zoom ends. So
he's going to tell you did a great job, because you did fantastic today. So we'll wait just a few more moments, see if we get any questions in here.
Yeah. If no one has a question, I'll obviously wait. I do have one parting word that I would say, but obviously I'll wait, to see if there's a question. But I guess, if anyone's typing one, go ahead. You can ask me anything really, or, friend me on LinkedIn for sure. But I know how hard it can be to look for a job, look for an internship opportunity under normal circumstances. And I saw my roommate despair over it when I was still in school, and he was very competent, very capable, was a student council president, and nothing seemed to work out for months and months and months. But he he took an internship when he was looking for a job, and that was unpaid, and he worked there for 6 months, and then he eventually got not the opportunity he wanted, but something that would look very good. It didn't pay very well, but it ended up looking very well. And after a year and a half of that, looking around and feeling around and what experience am I going through, and how is this aligned with what I want to do, he very quickly ended up in a type of industry, PR consulting, that he wanted to be in, at a great firm. And then when that firm was, when they weren't treating him so well, but he had gained the experience, he immediately got an opportunity with a big pay raise to work at another PR consulting firm, all within the span of 3.5 years, going from 6 months of despairing over looking for a job or having issues to taking a job that wasn't ideal. And then, so that's the first year and a half. And then 2 years after that, he has his dream job, and he loves working in the place he's in. And they took him away from a different place he was in. And that your career can turn on a dime as long as you're someone who's hungry, someone who's working hard, and someone who's seeking out networking opportunities and real life opportunities. Like, it'll come. My father likes that. I can see his face now. He says you got to be hungry. Like, show the people that you're interacting with that you are the person who's someone offers you a job or a chance to interview or to connect with someone who might have a job, email them back within 12 hours, or at least definitely within 24 hours. Show them that you want it. And the people who want it are the people who are going to create their own luck. And, I started this out by saying, like, I was in your shoes in a non-pandemic situation. I sent my resume to 40, 50, like 80 places, and got a couple responses that said, "Nah, we're not interested." And that's tough. Like, I thought I was smart and a good student and did my part and had this great resume of extracurriculars, and like, it's tough. But if you just keep pushing through it and you just keep trying to open doors, you don't know which door is going to lead into the job that you love. And it happens and it works out most of the time, but you have to just put in the work before you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And that's the only way that you'll actually find that light.
Avi, thank you very much for sharing. Joel, I know you're here. I'm going to unmute you so you can share a little bit. Or there you go. Go right ahead.
I have nothing to add. I think he did a great job as a father. I have to say, nothing can make a father happier than to know that their kid actually listened and absorbed what they were saying over the years. So I have nothing to add.
Terrific. Listen, we appreciate both of you for what you've been able to do for our YU students. And I thank you both for joining us tonight. We did get one question from one of our students. They had asked Barbara to ask you if you were to give one single piece of advice for this weird summer of being home while working, maybe that you haven't necessarily given before or during this chat. What would you say to help them navigate this summer?
I'm not sure I can think of something unique that would go beyond what I said. And that's not to say that I'm a know-it-all who came up with the best answers to all the questions that you had, Matt. But I would say, beyond what I said, think of whatever opportunity you have as the thing that you want to do the best at now. And just think, who can I reach out to? How can I expand my horizons? If you don't like the place you're working in, if you do like the place you're working in, just think, I was given a blessing in disguise, right? People, you got to make the most. I think the name of the talk was how to make the most of the opportunity you have, how to turn the opportunity you have into the one you want. I think that was the name of the talk. I'll give one example in my life that I've alluded to a little bit. I went Shana Bed in Israel. My parents didn't want me to, talked them into it. Great. And I was in the YU Honors program. They wouldn't let me start school in January. I was only wanted to go to Israel through January for my Shana Bet. My parents only wanted me to go to Israel through Shana Bet. And I had to come up with, but YU wouldn't let me start taking classes. So what am I going to do for 6 months? And almost immediately stumbled upon the solution. I don't remember who recommended it, to become a licensed DMT. And I was able to do it with two friends who were in the exact same position. And that became one of the most life-changing experiences of my life, for sure. Some of the most unique experience that I have, for sure. And it just, good things come in weird places. And the pandemic in a lot of ways is very unfortunate, obviously for the health consequences and the way it's impacted people's lives, but in terms of how it affects you, it is a blessing in disguise. And when did you ever have this opportunity to, where basically nothing is getting asked for you, or what your internship's getting asked of you, but you have so little pulling at you, distracting you, other than the trappings of your own house? Just think, like, what can you do now that you could have never done before? And, not every opportunity is out there and available now because places have to be closed. But something my father would want me to say right now is look for some just classes online. There are these certificate programs you can take over the course of a couple weeks, a couple months. And then when someone asks you, what did you do during the coronavirus summer? You say, well, I had this research opportunity, it wasn't what I wanted, or you don't say I wasn't what I wanted, but you say, it wasn't taking up as much of my time as a job would have taken, or I lost my internship opportunity. But what I did was I found this great certificate program online. I was able to learn over the course of 6 weeks, how to become better at data visualization. I was able to become better at using Excel or whatever it is. Then you not only did you get a skill or learn something and put something on your resume, but now you're showing that you're the kind of person who doesn't just lay down and take it because circumstances put you down. You're someone who says, how do I flip this loss of an opportunity into a new opportunity? That's a long way of saying, just think, what can you do now that you could have never done before, you wouldn't have been able to do before? And if you think like that, then you'll find the best solution for you, because each person, that option is going to be the best. Becoming an EMT wouldn't be the best for everyone. Taking a certificate program in data visualization wouldn't be the best for everyone. But there's something out there that will improve your career prospects, that is available online, or that is available for someone you can connect to over the phone. And if you find it for yourself, it'll improve your career prospects in the long run.
There's not a better way than to end on a specific and realistic but optimistic outlook for the next quarter, the short term and the long term, of making the most of what's going on for each of these students and their opportunities. Again, wanted to reiterate how much I appreciate Mr. Avi Strauss for joining us today, Mr. Joel Strauss for also joining us today and supporting his son. Nothing better than looking at something like that here and having the both of you be able to, create some synergy for our students who really need our support this summer and beyond. So I thank you very much for making the time. Students, I thank you for joining us today. And I hope you all are well. Take care, and we'll definitely be in touch. Avi, I'll follow up with you very soon. Joel, I can't wait to see you again at an in-person event that we, fingers crossed, we'll be able to cross paths.
Hopefully.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you all. Have a great night. Be well.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.